Most people think they understand quiet personalities until they cross a Sigma INFJ. What looks soft is strategic. What looks passive is observant. And what looks silent is calculating a truth most people aren't ready to face. The biggest mistake anyone can make is assuming a Sigma INFJ is predictable, harmless, or easy to influence. Because the moment someone underestimates them, that's the moment the Sigma INFJ stops watching and starts acting. People don't realize they're dealing with a different breed entirely. Someone who thinks 10 steps ahead, sees motives forming before the person even speaks them, and withdraws not out of fear, but out of preparation. Underestimating a Sigma INFJ is not just a miscalculation. It's a psychological mistake with consequences you only understand when it's too late. Before we dive into the 9 mistakes people make, ask yourself this. Have you ever watched someone realize far too late that they misjudged your silence? If yes, type yes in the comments. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. This is where we decode the Sigma INFJ mind with precision no one else dares to touch. They mistake the Sigma INFJ's silence for weakness instead of strategic observation. They think quiet means fragile, passive, unaware. But a Sigma INFJ's silence is the calm before a psychological shift they never see coming. While others rush to speak, defend, or posture, the Sigma INFJ steps back, watching with an intensity that disarms even the loudest personalities. In that stillness, they absorb tone, energy, inconsistencies, and the emotional fingerprints people leave behind without realizing it. What looks like retreat is actually reconnaissance. What looks like softness is precision. And what looks like weakness is the sharpening of insight that will later expose everything hidden beneath the surface. The room keeps moving while the Sigma INFJ remains still, collecting truths everyone else overlooks. They read micro-expressions, emotional fractures, half-formed motives, and subtle shifts in power that most people are too distracted to notice. The manipulator thinks they're winning because the INFJ isn't reacting. The narcissist believes they hold control because the INFJ isn't defending themselves. The loud personalities assume they dominate the space simply because the INFJ chooses not to fill it. But the Sigma INFJ sees the entire psychological landscape at once. They understand the story beneath the story, the intention beneath the words, the pattern beneath the chaos. Silence becomes their vantage point, elevated, untouchable, and devastatingly accurate. And when the Sigma INFJ finally moves, it's with clarity that feels like a strike. They speak once, and the entire dynamic shifts. They detach once, and the entire relationship collapses. They decide once, and the manipulator loses all influence instantly. The truth is this: the Sigma INFJ's silence is never passive. It is strategic, calculated, and rooted in a profound understanding of human behavior. Those who mistake it for weakness miscalculate the one personality that can see them fully and choose exactly when and how to respond. Their quiet doesn't protect them by accident. It protects them by design. They assume the Sigma INFJ doesn't notice manipulation, not realizing they saw it from the first second. People think they can slip a lie past a Sigma INFJ, hide a motive behind a smile, or disguise selfish intent beneath charm. But the INFJ clocked the shift the moment it entered the room. Their intuition doesn't wait for evidence, patterns, or dramatic reveals. It reacts instantly, quietly mapping the emotional temperature, the micro-hesitations, the unnatural pauses, the forced enthusiasm that contradicts the energy beneath it. A Sigma INFJ doesn't figure it out later, they know. They always know. And the most dangerous part is how calm they remain while watching everything unfold exactly as they predicted. To the manipulator, the INFJ's lack of confrontation feels like an invitation, as if the INFJ is too soft, too trusting, too unaware to recognize the game being played. But the Sigma INFJ is simply gathering data, confirming patterns, watching how deep the deception goes. They observe the contradictions between words and actions, the emotional withdrawals disguised as excuses, the praise that feels like bait, the sudden intensity that doesn't match previous interest. Every inconsistency is stored, analyzed, and categorized without a single reaction. Their silence becomes a mirror that reflects the manipulator's tactics back at them, even before the manipulator realizes they've been exposed. And when the Sigma INFJ finally acts, it's not emotional, it's decisive. Their detachment arrives so smoothly that the manipulator can't identify the moment control was lost. One day, the INFJ stops reacting. Then they stop engaging. And eventually, they stop being accessible at all. By the time the manipulator wakes up to the shift, the INFJ has already severed emotional ties and stepped into clarity so sharp it leaves the other person powerless. Because the Sigma INFJ never needed proof to trust their intuition, they simply waited to see if the other person would reveal themselves fully. And manipulators always do. They think the Sigma INFJ is emotionally dependent, unaware that detachment is their hidden superpower. People mistake the Sigma INFJ depth for dependence, believing that someone who feels so intensely must also cling intensely. But emotional depth is not emotional need. A Sigma INFJ connects fully only because they choose to, not because they cannot function alone. And when their inner alarm shifts from warmth to warning, their detachment activates with surgical precision. The bond others assumed was unbreakable dissolves silently, almost elegantly, leaving the INFJ free long before the other person realizes anything has changed. What looked like vulnerability was actually observational intimacy, a way of understanding the emotional architecture of the relationship, and the moment the structure shows cracks, they step back without hesitation. This detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. Once a Sigma INFJ recognizes someone is draining them, disrespecting their boundaries, or taking advantage of their empathy, a quiet transformation unfolds. They begin to emotionally unhook themselves, thread by thread, day by day. Conversations shorten. Reactions soften. Their once open presence becomes still, measured, distant. They stop offering emotional labor. They stop explaining themselves. They stop filling in the gaps someone else refuses to address. This isn't withdrawal out of pain, it's self-restoration. While the other person assumes the INFJ is still attached, the INFJ is already halfway out the door, rebuilding their inner landscape piece by intentional piece. And when the detachment is complete, it is absolute. The Sigma INFJ doesn't leave with drama, they leave with peace. No warnings, no explosions, no desperate attempts to be understood. Just a calm disappearance that feels almost supernatural in its finality. And this is where their true power lies. Once detached, they are unreachable. Emotional hooks no longer work. Manipulation bounces off a wall of internal clarity. Attempts to pull them back only reveal how far they've already gone. People finally understand, too late, that the INFJ was never dependent. They were invested. And investment can end. But their independence? That was there from the beginning, hidden beneath their quiet loyalty, waiting for the moment it was needed again. They underestimate how quickly a Sigma INFJ can cut ties once trust is broken. People assume the Sigma INFJ clings to relationships because they invest so deeply, listen so intently, and care with a sincerity that feels rare. They mistake devotion for permanence, believing the INFJ will stay no matter how many times the bond is strained. But what they never see coming is the speed with which everything changes the moment trust fractures. The Sigma INFJ does not drift away slowly or leave breadcrumbs of warning. Their withdrawal is silent, immediate, and absolute, a shift so sudden it feels like the emotional equivalent of a door slamming in a soundproof room. One day, the connection feels warm and safe. The next, it is gone without explanation, replaced by a sharp clarity that leaves no room for return. The reason this detachment appears so abrupt is because the INFJ has been evaluating the relationship long before the break ever shows. Their intuition tracks micro-patterns in behavior, tone, intention, inconsistencies most people cannot see. While the other person assumes everything is fine, the INFJ is already mapping the emotional trajectory, noticing every boundary crossed, every small betrayal that chipped away at the foundation. They don't confront immediately. Confrontation isn't their first language. Instead, they observe, analyze, and internalize until a final, undeniable truth crystallizes. The trust is gone. And once that truth solidifies, there is nothing left to discuss, repair, or negotiate. Their heart, once open, shuts with quiet precision. Not out of anger, but out of certainty. And when a Sigma INFJ is certain, the relationship ends at the level of identity, not emotion. They do not run back for closure. Do not reopen old wounds. Do not revisit what has already been spiritually buried. Their absence is clean, complete, and non-negotiable. This shocks those who underestimated them, who believed their empathy made them loyal to the point of self-destruction. But empathy is not blindness, and once trust breaks, the INFJ's self-respect rises like a wall no one can climb. People finally learn the hard truth. The INFJ's deepest loyalty exists only where trust lives. Destroy the trust, and you destroy the connection instantly. They leave not because they stopped caring, but because they finally started caring about themselves. They assume the Sigma INFJ will tolerate disrespect repeatedly. They won't. People often mistake the Sigma INFJ's patience for passivity, thinking their calm responses and quiet forgiveness mean they will endure disrespect over and over without consequence. But what outsiders fail to understand is that every instance of disrespect is recorded with razor-sharp precision in the INFJ's internal world. They may not react immediately or confront the issue on the spot, yet their silence is not acceptance. It is evaluation. The Sigma INFJ gives space for people to correct themselves, not because they are weak, but because they believe in human potential and emotional growth. But once they recognize a pattern, once the same line is crossed again and again, something inside them hardens. What once looked like tolerance becomes the quiet beginning of detachment. Their threshold for disrespect is far lower than people realize, because the INFJ views disrespect not as a single act, but as a reflection of someone's character. They notice the tone beneath the words, the intention behind the gesture, the enjoyment someone takes in being dismissive or condescending. They feel the shift in energy, the growing imbalance, the way their kindness becomes an opening for exploitation. And while others may tolerate these subtle degradations to preserve a relationship, the Sigma INFJ won't. They know that sustained disrespect corrodes the soul, and the more they sense themselves shrinking to maintain the connection, the closer they move toward an irreversible decision. All the moments they remained quiet were not submission. They were warnings the other person failed to read. When the decision finally comes, it is swift, final, and mercilessly clean. The Sigma INFJ will disappear without argument, without dramatic confrontation, without the need for anyone to understand their reasoning. They do not seek revenge, validation, or closure. Their silence is the closure. The person who once believed the INFJ would tolerate anything suddenly finds themselves shut out permanently, left to wonder how they lost someone who gave them so many chances. What they never understood was that the INFJ's grace is not infinite, it is conditional on respect. And once that condition is broken, there is no path back. They misjudge the INFJ's empathy as naivety, not realizing it's actually psychological insight. Many people look at an INFJ's gentle tone, soft understanding, and instinctive compassion and assume they are dealing with someone easy to fool. They mistake empathy for gullibility, believing the INFJ's willingness to listen is proof they can be taken advantage of. But what they fail to grasp is that INFJ empathy is not blind softness. It is a finely tuned instrument of perception. When a Sigma INFJ listens, they don't just hear words, they dissect motives, emotional patterns, contradictions, and the unspoken pain people try to hide. Their empathy is a decoding tool, not a vulnerability. And while others see only kindness, the INFJ is quietly mapping the emotional landscape of the person in front of them, determining exactly who they are dealing with. Because INFJs rarely expose their conclusions, others assume nothing has been noticed. They think the INFJ doesn't see the manipulation, the lies, the subtle ego flares, the insecurity beneath the bragging. But the INFJ sees all of it, sometimes more clearly than the person themselves. Their empathy allows them to understand why someone behaves badly long before they choose how to respond. They read emotional injuries in the same way others read facial expressions. They sense trauma in tone, desperation in silence, tension in posture. It's why they can walk into a room and instantly understand the entire atmosphere. Yet, instead of using this insight to attack or expose someone, they store it quietly, letting the truth shape their decisions. What looks like naivety is actually restraint. The INFJ simply chooses not to reveal how much they truly know. When the truth finally matters, when patterns reveal themselves, the INFJ's empathy becomes their greatest strategic advantage. They can predict reactions, understand weak points, and see exactly how someone will respond before they take a single step. Manipulators who believed the INFJ was an easy target eventually realize they were the ones being observed, evaluated, and understood with surgical accuracy. And when the INFJ finally withdraws, confronts, or cuts someone off, it never comes from confusion. It comes from complete psychological clarity. The moment people realize the INFJ wasn't naive at all is often the moment they lose access to them forever. They believe the Sigma INFJ won't fight back, forgetting they win by outthinking, not overpowering. People often mistake the Sigma INFJ's calm demeanor for passivity. They see someone who doesn't argue, doesn't raise their voice, doesn't engage in dominance battles, and they assume this means the INFJ won't fight back. But the Sigma INFJ's refusal to clash is not fear, it's strategy. They don't waste energy on noise. They don't participate in ego games. Instead, they watch, analyze, and calculate in silence. While others are busy proving themselves, the Sigma INFJ is already 3 steps ahead, identifying patterns, predicting responses, and crafting an internal map of the situation. Their strength is not in confrontation, it's in precision. They win by understanding what others overlook, and by shaping outcomes before anyone realizes there's a shift happening. What makes them truly dangerous is that their response is never impulsive. They don't fight back in the moment because they're not operating on adrenaline, they're operating on comprehension. They let people reveal their character fully, gathering every inconsistency, every manipulation attempt, every motive hidden behind a smile. And then, when the moment comes, the Sigma INFJ doesn't attack. They remove themselves from the battlefield entirely. They cut emotional cords, withdraw access, shift direction, and choose a path where the manipulator no longer has influence. This kind of response isn't loud or dramatic, it's decisive, silent, and final. It leaves the other person confused, powerless, and unable to regain the ground they assumed they controlled. By the time someone realizes the Sigma INFJ has fought back, the war is already over. The INFJ doesn't need to win through force, intimidation, or conflict. They win through clarity, insight, and timing. They dismantle manipulation without confrontation, end relationships without chaos, and outmaneuver opponents without ever raising their voice. Their victory lies in understanding the whole board, while others focus on individual moves. And once the Sigma INFJ makes their decision, it's irreversible. They don't return to old patterns, they don't re-enter toxic dynamics, and they don't explain themselves. People only realize too late that the INFJ was not avoiding the fight, they were choosing how to win it. They think the INFJ shares everything, unaware that 90% of their mind is private and protected. People often assume that because an INFJ listens deeply, speaks thoughtfully, and connects emotionally, they must also be fully open. They mistake empathy for transparency. They hear fragments of truth and believe they've been given the whole map. But the INFJ's inner world is a labyrinth, vast, intricate, symbolic, and only a tiny portion ever reaches the surface. What others see are curated windows, not doors. What others hear are chosen truths, not confessions. The INFJ reveals just enough to maintain connection, but never enough to lose autonomy. Their silence isn't emptiness, it's architecture. Their privacy is not a defense mechanism, it's sovereignty. And while people believe they understand them, the INFJ is already 10 layers deeper, analyzing the moment from angles no one else has considered. Even in their closest relationships, INFJs maintain an internal sanctuary no one is invited into. They observe life from a dual vantage point, participating on the outside while analyzing from the inside. They weigh motives, map emotional patterns, and store meaning in ways others can't detect. Their ability to read people often convinces others that they must also be readable, but the opposite is true. NFJs are mirrors, not glass. People see themselves reflected back and call it understanding, never realizing the INFJ has shared little in return. They speak in symbols, not direct revelations. They give emotional clarity without revealing emotional vulnerability. They offer comfort while silently carrying their own storms. And because they rarely correct these assumptions, people mistake comfort for closeness and insight for intimacy. This misconception becomes a critical mistake, especially when someone tries to manipulate or control an INFJ. They attack the wrong layer, unaware that the INFJ has already retreated to deeper psychological ground, where influence cannot reach. The INFJ's real thoughts, real intentions, and real emotional truths remain untouched, protected by intuition and years of observing human behavior. When the INFJ finally withdraws, people are stunned, not because the INFJ changed, but because they never knew the real person to begin with. The INFJ's mind is not a place others are allowed to enter. It is a place others only imagine they've seen. They fail to see that once a Sigma INFJ is done, there is no conversation, no warning, just silence. People always expect closure, explanations, or one final emotional scene. They assume that someone as empathetic and observant as a Sigma INFJ will sit down, talk it through, or offer a gentle goodbye. But what they don't understand is that by the time a Sigma INFJ leaves, the relationship ended long ago in their mind. The emotional cord was severed silently, long before any outward change appeared. They gave chances, extended grace, observed patterns, and tested possibilities. They stayed through disappointment and clarity alike. And when the final line is crossed, when trust breaks beyond repair, they don't argue. They don't negotiate. They don't announce their departure. They simply vanish. Their silence is not coldness. It is the final truth. It is the moment when the internal decision becomes external reality, and by then, nothing anyone says can reopen the door. Their disappearance always confuses those who rely on drama, confrontation, or emotional bargaining. These people wait for reactions that never come. They expect anger, but receive indifference. They expect hurt, but meet peace. A Sigma INFJ's silence is a psychological shift, a complete withdrawal of energy, empathy, and attention. It leaves the manipulator, the user, or the toxic person alone with their own intentions, exposed without resistance. The absence becomes louder than any speech. Without the INFJ's emotional cushioning, the truth echoes sharply. The relationship was sustained entirely by the INFJ's effort. And now, without that effort, the connection collapses instantly. Silence is not avoidance. It is liberation. It is the INFJ reclaiming every piece of themselves that was drained, misunderstood, or taken for granted. What people fail to see is that this silence is permanent. There is no reopening, no rekindling, no second chance disguised as nostalgia. Sigma INFJs don't walk away to teach a lesson. They walk away because the lesson has already been learned. They don't detach as punishment. They detach because they've outgrown the connection emotionally and spiritually. Attempts to reach them feel like knocking on a door that no longer exists. Their energy has shifted. Their intuition has moved on. And once a Sigma INFJ is done, they never return to a place that once betrayed their trust. It isn't cruelty. It's evolution. When a Sigma INFJ finally steps out of a story, it isn't the end of a chapter, it's the end of an entire book. They don't close doors, they dismantle the entire doorway so they can't be pulled back into a cycle they already outgrew. Their silence becomes their safety. Their distance becomes their healing. And their absence becomes the loudest truth anyone will ever hear from them. Because once a Sigma INFJ chooses themselves over the version they had to be for others, they never return to the battlefield they walked away from. They evolve. They rise. They rebuild their inner world, this time without compromise. People may wonder why the INFJ left so quietly, but the real question is why they were pushed to that point at all. Silence isn't weakness. It's the final boundary. It's the moment an INFJ's intuition stops warning and starts acting. It is the transformation from someone who tried to help to someone who knows better. And that shift changes everything. Anyone who has ever experienced the disappearance of a Sigma INFJ knows that their absence carries a weight far heavier than their presence ever did, because it reveals the truth they carried all along. If this resonated with you, tell me in the comments. Have you ever reached that point of silence? Write the word "done" if you've ever walked away without looking back.